I don't know what it is, but recently, if I don't do a poll somewhere, I have a really hard time finding a recipe and just committing to it for a video. And I had nothing up until this morning when the homie Chris Morocco came through with his chocolate cake recipe. Now this looks great, and all of his food and Bon Appetit's food in general is always fantastic, but I figured we could kind of spice this video up a little bit by putting it up against a recipe I know is incredible, and that is Tasty's ultimate chocolate cake that I have made quite a few times in the last few years. By the way, Merry Christmas! I finally got all the decorations up behind me just a week late in December. This ought to be a really good versus episode though, so let's get right into this. As far as our cakes go, we are going to start off with Tasty's ultimate chocolate cake, for no other reason than the fact that we always start with the Tasty recipe first, as well as I've made this plenty of times, so I pretty much know what to expect. Now the main ingredients for the cake layers are some flour and baking soda, some Dutch cocoa powder and some sugar, eggs, salt, vanilla extract, baking powder, and dark chocolate. Now the craziest part of this recipe is actually not how much work it takes to make this cake, but it's the 3 secret kind of gross ingredients, which is some dark stout beer like Guinness, some instant espresso powder, and mayonnaise. Trust me, you don't taste any one of these 3 components in the end product, and in my opinion, it makes all the difference in this recipe. Now, if you guys have seen me make this recipe in the past, you'd probably be familiar with the process here. It basically comes together in 3 components, starting with your wet ingredients in 1 container, your dry ingredients in another. Just make sure it is whisked together really thoroughly, and then it can all come together in your stand mixer after you start with your butter and sugar and stuff like that. Now, as with most cakes, your base is obviously going to be your butter and sugar, eventually adding in 3 eggs, incorporating 1 at a time, making sure it's fully incorporated before you add in the next one, and then finishing the base with your mayonnaise. Again, trust me, you don't taste it, but it makes a super moist, fluffy end product, so just roll with me. I was just as skeptical as you guys were when I first saw this, but if you think about it, it's really just eggs and oil, so it's not as gross as it really seems. You then have to alternate between adding your wet ingredients, your dry ingredients. I like to do 3 batches of each, so 6 additions by the end. Don't overmix this. You don't want to develop a ton of gluten like you're making a chocolate bread. And we are going to finish this with some chocolate chunks, because any good chocolate tasty recipe ends with some dark chocolate chunks. Now off camera, I prepared 3 8-inch round cake pans, just with some unsalted butter and some parchment paper. Feel free to use some nonstick spray or whatever you like to use for your cakes at home. But we are going to bake these in a 325-degree oven for at least 25 to 35 minutes. Depending on the heat of your oven, just check with a toothpick or a skewer, and once it comes out clean, they are done. Now while those were cooling, we're going to start working on our homemade chocolate buttercream, which in my opinion makes this cake. It brings everything together, and it's literally only made up of powdered sugar, butter, vanilla, and cocoa powder. As with all of my tested videos, I will leave the link to the original recipes down in the description if you want to go check out cooking times or exact measurements. The main thing I tell people when they're making a homemade frosting is that this is one of the most temperamental food items. It has so many variables, how much air you initially incorporate into your butter, if you're in a wet climate or a dry climate. Just know that the majority of these variables can be adjusted at the end with a little bit of whole milk if your icing gets a little bit too clumpy, or just a little bit more powdered sugar if you think the frosting is too runny. The only thing left to do now is remove our cakes from the pans, peel off all those layers of parchment paper, and then try my best to stack them evenly and frost them evenly. It's a lot easier said than done. I am in no way, shape, or form a cake decorator. I always try my best, but sometimes, you know, it kind of looks like an elementary schooler made this cake. If I had more time and more frosting to work with, I would probably do a crumb coat, because in my opinion, this looks pretty darn good anyway, and I know how good it's gonna taste. but we do have to set it aside for a few minutes while we work on Bon Appetit's version. Now, Chris Morocco's recipe is very different. The frosting is completely different. It's only 1 layer of cake in a 9-inch pan versus 3 layers, and the ingredients are a little bit different as well. If you want to make his, you're gonna need to grab some white sugar and baking soda, baking powder and whole milk, flour, cocoa powder, chocolate chips, vegetable oil, heavy cream, kosher salt, a couple of eggs, vanilla extract, and... Now normally, I would just cut to a deranged, mangling edit of me mutilating cream cheeses, but 1, this video is sponsored, and 2, we are dealing with a Chris Morocco recipe, and I can't see this being bad in any way, so for the time being, I'll just have to suck it up. Now, as far as Chris's recipe goes, the biggest difference besides the devil cream frosting is probably the technique in which this cake batter comes together. In the video, he stresses simplicity and producing as little dirty dishes as possible, so that's probably where some of these abnormal baking methods came from. But besides just starting with your normal dry mix, as you would with any cake batter, we have to mix together our eggs, oil, and vanilla, and then just kind of drizzle that in with our sugar and flour. This actually produces a really strange looking substance. It kind of just looks like a thick brownie batter. No cake batter that I've ever made has looked like this, so I am intrigued. But the next step is actually to warm a cup of milk on a low heat on your stove, and then right before it starts to boil over, dump that into your mix, and the heat from that should basically wake everything up and kind of bloom your chocolate as well as melt down some of those sugars. And this actually ended up looking pretty good by the end. I hope you didn't blink, because our cake batter is already done and ready to go in my 9-inch round pan that I prepared the same way with some parchment paper and butter, and threw that in a 325-degree oven, this time for 45 minutes. Again, this came out looking pretty darn good, so I'm gonna let it cool and work on our chocolate ganache cream cheese topping. Over a double boiler, I combined my chocolate chips and a half cup of my heavy cream. This is 4 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate. You can use chips or a bar. And really, I'm just procrastinating here because I don't want to touch that cream cheese. Unfortunately, I had to though. I let my ganache cool in the fridge while I creamed together the cream cheese, the vanilla, the salt. If you're new around here and you have no idea why I'm making a big deal about cream cheese, it's a very long story. I'm sure some of the comments will explain it to you. Just know it has a very long history of haunting my nightmares. I will admit, once I finished this mixture with my fully cooled ganache, it looked pretty good. It looked super light and fluffy. So once my cake was completely cooled and removed from my pan, I tried my best to finish it off with those little frosting swirlies that they did in the video. Needless to say, I aborted that mission very quickly and came up with my own, much easier design. We will have to wait and see if this design is Chris Morocco approved. All I know right now is that I cannot wait to dig my teeth into at least one of these cakes. So let's give them both a taste. So from the moment of inception throughout me cooking them, getting all the ingredients for them, there was really no doubt in my mind that this was gonna win, because I've had this multiple times before. It's probably the best cake I've ever eaten. But as it stands, I really don't know anymore. We pretty much know the drill with this one. This is pretty much without fail delicious every time. It's great because it's not just a punch of sweetness with some chocolate flavor. Is it? Ow.
What the hell did you do?
I just bit my cheek so hard. Ow. You get the bitterness from the dark chocolate and the beer. It's super rich. It's super just addictive. If you've never tried this, just make the cake, at least. You have to just try how good this is. Because I thought I had chocolate cake prior to this. It like reawakens you. I could eat that every day. It's just a lot of work. As far as this guy, appearance-wise it looks great. Obviously I failed with the little swoops, but I think the spiral looks fine. The biggest key here is whether or not that cream cheese is gonna come through. Because unfortunately, if I get any inkling of it at all, I feel like I can't do it. It's not that it necessarily tastes like cream cheese, but it's just so tangy and out there that you just can't help but to focus on it. Let's try just the cake. I feel like I'm giving this an unfair comparison. That's really great. For how quick that is, it's 10 times better than a box. It's just as frosting. I can't do it. And as much as I love Chris Morocco and the entire Bon Appetit team, for the first time ever, I think Tasty wins in a landslide. Actually, if you missed it, for the 100th episode, I combined my favorite recipes of all time I've ever done in 5 years of these videos. So if you've never tried this, I highly recommend that you do. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit me up with a big like. Other than that, have a fantastic weekend. I will see you right back here next time. Peace.
With the M without the AD. Flipping burgers and my money super lazy. Try and make a meal tonight, they ain't paying me. Try and supersize my life with my 18. Yeah, our style wasn't wavy, but we had a vision.